Okay, recording's on, and I'll turn it over to Dean to introduce our speaker for today.
Okay, my pleasure. Welcome, everyone. It's indeed my honor and privilege to introduce our speaker today. And I have a bio that I'd like to read for you. Dr. Gary Kleppel is a professor emeritus of biology at University of Albany. He trained in marine science, and after receiving his PhD from Fordham University in 1979, spent 25 years studying the ocean's food webs at universities on the Pacific and Atlantic coasts. Dr. Kleppel joined the University of Albany in 2000, and he served as director of the graduate program in biodiversity conservation and policy until 2015. During that time, his interest shifted toward agricultural ecology and sustainable food systems. Dr. Kleppel's past and continuing research focuses on ecology of regenerative grazing systems and how they can be used to control invasive plants, improve environmental and human health, and even mitigate climate change. Dr. Kleppel was the recipient of the University of Albany's 2014 Terra Award in Sustainability and the 2016 President's Award for Excellence in Public Engagement for his efforts to strengthen the ties between the university and the region's agricultural community. For the past 17 years, Dr. Kleppel and his wife have been owners and operators of a small, sustainably managed farm just west of Albany. Dr. Kleppel is founder and chair of the Agricultural Advisory Committee for the town of Knox, New York, and vice chair of the Albany County Agricultural and Farmland Protection Board. It's all yours, Gary.
Thank you, Ed. And thank you, Dean. Here we go.
Okay.
I'm just going to make a few changes here, modifications here so that I can see the screen as well. And before I start, I want to just say thank you to the UAlbany Emeriti and to the Emeritus Center for honoring me with the William L. Reese Fellowship. I'm also grateful to all the friends and colleagues and associates who've taken the time to attend this lecture today. This that you're looking at on the screen, food grown in sync with nature can prevent disease, improve health, and maybe save the planet, is sort of my thesis that I've been investigating, that I've been working at for about a decade. Though I must say the last part of the thesis is a little bit of a stretch, but maybe not too much. I believe there's considerable evidence to support a lot of what is in this hypothesis, and today I'll share some of that evidence with you. After providing some background on what regenerative agriculture is, I'll show you how we can heal the earth and improve our health through the process of simply growing food. Now, I believe that the more ways you look at a problem, the more fully you'll understand it and the more likely you are to get good outcomes. Thanks to a 3 Voices grant provided by the Emeritus Center, I've been fortunate enough to be able to visit with and examine my hypothesis with some of the great scientists, including distinguished Professor Ratan Lal from the Ohio State University, and Professor Emeritus Fred Provenza of Utah State, and others who you'll meet through this lecture. I've also had the opportunity to work with great farmers. Here is Joel Salatin, who's using pigs to restore a forest, and I've met those pigs. They're nice. You'll hear more about their work and the work of other scientists and farmers today as I go through this lecture. I'm also fortunate myself to be both a scientist and a farmer, so I've been able to look at the problems engendered by the regenerative philosophy of farming from multiple perspectives. And so I'm going to share some of those perspectives with you today. And we'll start with the soil, the earth. The soil is that thin layer of the planet that stands between us and starvation. So says Professor Eric Rodden of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Healthy soil teems with life. It's full of microbes, insects, arachnids, worms. It holds carbon, nutrients, and water. It's the basis of fertility, and 98% of our food is grown in or on the soil. So it's a real problem when we find that a third of the Earth's soils are severely degraded due largely to agricultural practices, according to Professor Dave Montgomery from the University of Washington, who is a professor of geomorphology and also, by the way, a MacArthur Genius Fellow. Globally, 45 billion tons of soil are being lost each year, according to the US Department of Agriculture. And the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN reported in 2014, 7 years ago, that at the current rate of loss, the Earth's topsoil will be gone in less than 60 years. So coupled with climate change and population growth, a hungry planet, the soil crisis threatens the very survival of our species. This is due in large part to this process here, the turning over of the soil, the plowing up of the soil. And if you remember pictures, you may have seen pictures from the 1930s Dust Bowl, where the soil in the Midwest simply blew away. Well, this picture of a cloud of dust was taken in June of 2019, just outside of Lubbock, Texas. So it continues. The industrial system of farming that produces 97% of our food is literally killing our soils and by proxy killing us. Plowing and the application of synthetic pesticides, weed killers, and fertilizers actually weaken the living soil, and they produce nutrient depleted food that contains the very toxins that we're farming with. And I'll show you data on all of that. Poor quality, often contaminated food, of course, facilitates chronic inflammation and morbidity in us. So I'll be presenting today 4 take-home messages. And the first take-home message is simply that the way we produce food and what we eat has consequences. Now, I believe that we can produce food in ways that heal the earth and actually improve our health. And that's what I'm going to show you today. And the way we do that is through a process called regenerative agriculture. Regenerative agriculture restores soil, restores ecosystems, restores food systems, and restores health. And here's the secret. Here's how you do it. Copy nature. Okay. When we apply ecological principles to the process of food production, farming becomes an act of conservation. The earth is a food production system, and it's been feeding living organisms for 4.5 billion years. So before I go further, I've mentioned 2 types of agriculture: industrial, sometimes called conventional agriculture, and regenerative agriculture. And I just want to give you a quick survey of what each of those are, or what each of those is. Industrial agriculture emphasizes production. How much can I produce, how quickly, and how cheaply? To do that, I have to use monocultures, a single crop or a single species, 5,000 acres of lettuce, okay? And I would tell you that nature hates monocultures. Nature likes diversity. So there's a problem. And to get past that problem, I have to use intensive inputs. Inputs are things like synthetic fertilizers. Inputs are things like pesticides and herbicides. And if I'm growing animals, I have to use high energy feeds, usually grains like corn or soy, and other growth stimulants, sometimes like hormones, to get those animals grown quickly and out the door. Very often I have to use confinement for either part or all of an animal's life. Regenerative agriculture is very different. Of course, the regenerative farmer has to focus on production, But of at least equal importance is environmental stewardship. The regenerative farmer usually operates on small to medium scales, and production is diversified. A few crops, a combination of crops and livestock, etc. As a result, no inputs or few inputs are needed. Every so often, some farmers will use an herbicide to get rid of a biological invasion that they just don't seem to be able to stop. The regenerative farm is almost always pasture-based. We've heard the word grass-fed and grass-finished. Finishing is the last phase of growing an animal. And pasture-based means that the only thing that animal is going to get is the forage on pasture. And when the growing season ends, the animal will go into a barn, usually with the ability to go in and out of the barn, and it will be fed hay, never grain. And confinement is always minimal, if at all. So very different systems. Now, there are different ways of describing regenerative agriculture. At the very pinnacle, perhaps, is organic farming. For farmers like me who don't go for full certification, we call it organic-ish farming, where the few things that we may disagree with, the certification keeps us from seeking certification. This conservation agriculture, which seeks to maintain the fertility of the soil as a first goal, and permaculture, which looks at the design of natural systems and seeks to emulate that in the agricultural system. The rules are of all of regenerative agriculture are pretty much the same. Break the soil as little as possible. This is a no-till seeder. There's planting crops without tilling the soil to prevent carbon and water loss. Keep the ground covered to prevent erosion, runoff, and nutrient leaching. Use composts. Composts are not just inputs of nutrients, they're inputs of microbes, which help stimulate the production of phytochemical richness in crops and also help protect plants from invasions or attack by pathogens like fungi. And use natural pest control, such as attracting insect-eating birds rather than chemical pest control. Rotate and diversify crops to diversify microbiomes, and if possible, integrate livestock with crops to improve microbial functioning. So you see, a lot of this is about the soil and about the microbes in the soil. In regenerative agriculture, where we have a different way than in conventional agriculture of raising animals. First of all, you should know that about 40% of the land area of the planet is arable. You can grow crops on it. And only about 1/3 of that is capable of growing large amounts of crops. The other 2/3 will only grow animals, can only be used for raising animals. And so look at this picture of a herd of bison in the Yellowstone National Park. Bison have been roaming the earth for over 1 million years. In 1 million years ago, there were as many bison in terms of biomass as there are cattle today. There were 160 million ruminants roaming what is now North America, and globally, there were billions of ruminants, all excreting methane from their mouths, all excreting methane, and they never changed the climate. So one must say that if the bison are inhabiting the landscape and not damaging it, and our agriculture is known to be damaging the landscape, perhaps, as they say, it's not the cow, it's the how. And so let's look at the how. First of all, let's look at these bison. They're all moving, they all seem to be moving, or many of them seem to be moving in a certain direction. I get the sense that they're moving from left to right. I also see that they're rather densely concentrated. There are a lot of animals on a relatively small area. Now look at a conventional pasture. These animals are stocked at about a density of about a ton per acre. Very different from the way the bison are stocked. And these animals, unlike the bison, which are constantly moving, these animals aren't moving at all, and they might not move for an entire season, or they might move just once or twice. These are my sheep, and you can see that they're stocked rather densely, sort of mimicking this pattern here. You see this little white fence around them, or you can guess that it goes around them. It keeps them in. There's about 8,000 volts of electricity on this fence at any time, so nothing goes in or out of this fence unless I turn off the electricity. And tomorrow, after a day of grazing, I will move this lightweight plastic fencing to a new enclosure or paddock, or to create a new enclosure or paddock from which the sheep will be able to graze. And the vegetation here won't see those sheep again for 30 to 60 days. Okay, and we call this multi-paddock grazing, and it's a form of regenerative management. And through the talk, you'll see that I abbreviate that MP, and I abbreviate conventional industrial agriculture as CI. And after these cows have been on this pasture for about 6 months to 9 months, they will be moved to a feedlot where they will receive an implant in their ear, which contains a hormone, estradiol or some other hormone, and they will receive a high energy grain feed, and this will rush their growth. It will explode their growth and finish them or end the growing process very, very quickly in 3 to 6 months. These sheep will live their entire life eating grass, either on pasture or after the season in the barn, always with a way to get out. And of course, when we grow food in the ways that I've just described for both plants and animals, the criticism of the industry is that this kind of farming just is not going to produce enough food for everyone. So we tested that hypothesis, or I should say the Rodale Institute of the Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania tested that claim, growing conventional and organic crops side by side. And I can tell you, using my 3 Voices grant, I had the opportunity to visit the Rodale Institute and see that experiment and talk to their executive director and their chief scientist. And here's the bottom line. The yields of organic and conventional food are about the same. The difference is that from year to year, conventional agriculture goes through boom and bust cycles. It's highly variable, whereas from year to year, organic agriculture tends to stay very constant. And organic agriculture requires less energy input, produces less greenhouse gas emissions, and tends to be much more profitable. So now let's talk about feeding and healing the earth. And to start with, I want you to remember that, or at least assume that nature knows what she's doing, okay? And so here's how it works. We start with the plant and the soil, okay? The plant takes carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Remember, carbon dioxide is a pollutant, so it's taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. It takes water from the soil, and it uses sunlight as an energy source. And it produces, through a process we all know called photosynthesis, 3 simple sugars, 3 or 4 carbon sugars. And it uses those 3 or 4 carbon sugars to make larger carbohydrates. And it also takes nutrients and micronutrients from the soil through the roots, and it makes everything it needs for growth, reproduction, metabolism, and anything left over goes back into the roots. And some of that food or that material, that substance is used to help the plant, to feed the plant during periods of dormancy or to get the next spring's shoots out of the ground and started. It also takes some of that carbon, that particularly the sugars that it's produced, and puts it into organic exudates, which are exuded at the edge of the root in a region called the rhizosphere, where millions of bacteria and fungi live. And the bacteria are thriving on these organic exudates, and they're producing chemicals which help maintain the plant's health. For instance, if a fungus attacks the plant, the bacteria will often produce chemicals that drive off or kill the fungus. Also, the fungi, the good fungi that are, we call these arbuscular mycorrhizae. Many of you have heard the name mycorrhizae. They live attached to the plant, and they send their tendrils or hyphae out into the soil. And these hyphae are searching for organic material. That could be feces, it could be urine, it could be dead things, and they break these things down and digest them and send some of that food back to the plant, where the plant trades those sugars that it produced photosynthetically with the food that the fungi is providing, the nutrients that the fungi are providing. And as a result, the bacteria and fungi are living good lives. They live a full, happy life, producing chemicals. If there are other plants around, they will interact and produce a whole bunch of different kinds of chemicals, which give rise to nutrient density and to chemicals that are necessary for the plant, like tannins and other things that make the plant more healthy and more healthy as food. And the bacteria and fungi, some of them ultimately live and die, and they will glom onto, as the dead bodies of the bacteria will attach to bits of minerals and bits of soil and become stabilized as carbon, or what we call humus. And this is basically the fertility of the soil. It will hold water in the soil. For every percent carbon that's in the soil, we're holding 50,000 gallons of water per acre. That's incredible, but 50,000 gallons of water per acre. And now we have one more step, and that is the herbivore, which is going to eat that plant and process it, and it will absorb, it will assimilate maybe 30% of the food that it ate, and the rest is processed in the rumen through the digestive system by millions, trillions of bacteria and fungi that live inside the animal and produce a product that is easily recycled, nutritionally recycled or nutrient recycled by the bacteria and fungi living in the soil. So if this plant just dies and decays, it takes the bacteria and fungi 21% longer than to deal with this processed food that the cow has left behind. And of course, we now can add one more step to that cycle, and that is the herbivore, or the carnivore and omnivore, which will cycle energy out of this trophic level into the upper trophic levels. So let's take a look a little more at how grazing affects this soil microbiome, the microbes that live in the soil. Okay, so I a few years ago did a study in which I looked at the microbes living in soil that were being in pastures that were being grazed regeneratively, also pastures that were being grazed conventionally, and in hay fields that weren't being grazed but were being cut. And I found that the biomass, the amount of microbial material, microbial biomass, as well as the diversity of the microbes in the soil were higher significantly in the regenerative pastures than in the conventionally grazed pastures. And the stability represented by the ratio of fungi to bacteria, the higher that ratio, the more the carbon stays in, that's been sequestered into the soil, stays in that soil. So basically, the multi-paddock regenerative system outperformed both the conventional and the non-grazed, simply cut grasslands. We talk about carbon sequestration. That's that process by which carbon taken out of the atmosphere by photosynthesis is locked into the soil by microbial processes. And so the more microbial biomass we have, the more soil organic matter. Soil organic matter is an analog for carbon in the soil. So the more microbial biomass, the more soil organic matter. And we see in this study, which is being prepared for publication, that even environments as disparate as New York and Texas seem to show this, this relationship. However, if we look a little more closely, we see that the black circles, which represent regenerative grazing systems, tend to sequester more carbon than the conventional systems. So a farmer or rancher named Gabe Brown has made good use of this, switching from a corn soy ranch or farm that his in-laws owned. When he bought it, he turned it into a diverse regenerative system that raised cattle, sheep, chickens, and a variety of plants, both vegetables and grains. And he has, over 20 years, increased his soil organic matter by over 500%. Now, one of the things that I've been doing in my research is asking the question, what would happen if America's grazing lands were managed regeneratively? The yellow in this map represents pasture and rangeland. So you can see that most of the pasture and rangeland in this country is out west. And so I asked, what would happen if that was, instead of being managed conventionally, as most of it is, if it was managed regeneratively? And the answer that I've gotten, and I have to tell you that this is not something that this work has not been peer reviewed yet. So this is, you're the first people seeing this, and it's very tentative, but I decided to show it because it's so interesting, I think, and provocative. If we switch from conventional to regenerative grazing management, we would increase the carbon in the soils out in the West by about 4 gigatons. And we could remove a significant portion. The number I get is 69%, but I haven't written it down because I'm still not sure, but it looks like we're going to remove a significant portion of the total greenhouse gas emissions from US agriculture by sequestration if we switch simply from conventional to regenerative grazing. The other way to get rid of greenhouse gases, of course, other than sequestration, is by reducing emissions. This is from a paper that I published recently in Frontiers in Sustainable Food Systems. And in it, I showed the sources of greenhouse gas emissions, the major sources of greenhouse gas emissions in beef production, in beef cattle production, farm to gate. And And what it shows is if we switch from conventional to multi-paddock, that is regenerative, we can lower greenhouse gas emissions by about 35%. And the reason is because, not because of the animals, but because feed production for conventional agriculture produces so much greenhouse gas that we can reduce that by about 2/3. And that is a major part of the equation of lowering greenhouse gas emissions. Let's look a little bit at biodiversity. If you look at this beautiful pasture occupied obviously by sheep, and you can see that the grass is very green, but if you look closely, it looks like there's only one kind of grass out there. And that's typical of conventional systems. Now look at this system. This is the way nature intended the grassland to look at the same latitude. And this is my pasture, pretty much all at the same latitude. And you can see that when I first started farming, we had about 5 species of plants on our pastures. Today we have 50. So think about that. We talked about this phytochemical richness when microbes interact. So we're creating so much phytochemical richness in the landscapes. Now let's take a look at what that means. So this is data from one of my honors undergraduates, Corinne Giroux, who is now a veterinarian. And she was looking at 2 landscapes. One was a groomed pasture, and the other was a very relatively ungroomed part of a farm. It was on very steep slopes. It was very hard for the farmer or the farm manager to manage these rough areas on the farm. So, but this is where she had a flock of sheep, and she had another flock of sheep that she was looking at on the groomed pasture. And she found obviously that the wild or quasi-wild area was much more diverse in terms of its plant communities. And she noticed also that the protein, fat, and mineral ratios were better on the quasi-wild paddocks or pastures. And when she did what's called body condition scoring, BCS, where the farmer quickly gets a sense of how well nourished his or her livestock are by ranking their bodies from on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being emaciated, 5 being obese, and 3 being perfect. What Corinne did is she looked at the difference from that perfect value of 3 in the sheep from the quasi-wild and the groomed pasture. So the lower the value, the deviation, the more that those sheep were closer, the more those sheep were close to a value of 3, perfect. And there was a very significant, the chance that this is just a fact, an outcome due to chance is less than is about 1 in 1,000. And she found that the quasi-wild pasture was better than the groomed pasture in terms of having nourished sheep, a nourished flock of sheep. A few years later, my last graduate student, my last PhD student, Carolyn Gerard Cartier, looked at the farm, and she found that in areas where she was managing the sheep regeneratively, the biomass, the biodiversity of plants in those paddocks, in those areas, was higher than either the areas that were being conventionally managed or even than areas that were ungrazed. So the regenerative areas were doing better in terms of biodiversity, and therefore the diet of the sheep, than even the paddocks that are ungrazed. They're doing better than nature. Just a quick note about water. People frequently make the case that to grow a pound of cow, a pound of ground beef, it takes 2,500 gallons of water. I've actually heard that. That's absolutely not true. It actually takes in conventional agriculture, it takes about 250 gallons of water to grow a cow. That's not due to the fact that the cow is drinking. And by the way, these are not in gallons. These are liters, which is about a quart per 2 pounds of sheep. So the cow is drinking the same, whether it's in conventional or multi-paddock, that is regenerative agriculture. But the thing that really changes when we switch from feed production from conventional to regenerative production is the water required for feed production. So look, it goes down by a factor of 3. So the amount of water that it takes to grow a beef cattle is about a third of what it takes in regenerative agriculture, of what it takes to grow beef cattle in conventional agriculture. Further, pastures that are managed regeneratively have lower runoff than those managed conventionally, and therefore less nutrient leaching out of the soil. So take-home message number 2, remember there are 4. Regenerative agriculture restores, maintains, and enhances ecosystems. So let's look at feeding ourselves and healing ourselves. And we're going to take the lead from none other than Hippocrates, let food be your medicine. And I realize this is a hard table to look at, but this is the results of a study done at Rutgers University, where the authors looked at several kinds of vegetables produced and the minerals in those vegetables when those vegetables were grown either organically and conventionally. And to make a long story short, the vegetables that were grown organically were more mineral dense. They contained higher amounts of minerals than the vegetables grown conventionally. Here, these numbers in black represent the amounts of the ratio of organic to conventional mineral content. So for calcium, organic snap beans are 2.6 times, contain 2.6 times more calcium than conventional snap beans. They contain 30 times more manganese than conventional snap beans, and so on. You can see the numbers go up to pretty high, 516. I mentioned very early in the talk that the chemicals used in farming are actually, to produce our food, are actually killing us. This is the results of a very interesting study by Nancy Swanson and her colleagues in Washington State, where they looked at glyphosate. Glyphosate is the #1 herbicide used around the world. And what you're looking at here is the incidence of thyroid cancer as in these bars, and the red line represents the change in the use of glyphosate over a number of years. And you can see it doesn't take a PhD in statistics to realize that these things are tracking each other. Inflammatory bowel disease tracks glyphosate use. Even emotional distress over time represented as tracks the use of glyphosate. So what we're saying very handily here is that the world's most widely used weed killer is also killing us. And that's now been accepted by the courts. This study by Welch looks at pesticides and antibiotics in conventional and regeneratively organically produced milk. And the long story short here is that pesticides and antibiotics are 77% higher in milk produced conventionally than regeneratively. Again, the chemicals used in agriculture are killing us, or at least hurting us. Food carries with it the risk of infection, infectious disease. And one of the most significant kinds of infectious disease is antibiotic resistant bacteria, such as methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus, which, along with hospitals that were using inordinately large amounts of antibiotics, was first found in hog farms, in these industrial hog operations, which are obscene to start with. But they have antibiotic resistant bacteria have never been found in pasture-raised hogs or pigs. In this study done at Cornell, we see that the amount of E. coli 0157H7, that's the one that closes down places like Chipotle. It's a very deadly bacterium. And it was discovered that pasture-raised beef rarely contains that E. coli. This is less than 100 cells per pound of beef, where per kilogram of beef, whereas grain-fed beef, the more grain, the higher the E. coli count, and we understand why that happens. And I can tell you why in the question and answer session if you care. Cynthia Daly and her colleagues at University of California, Chico, compared the nutritional qualities of beef produced by grass-fed, that is the regenerative method, and grain-fed, the conventional method. And we find, of course, that grass-fed beef never has hormones, grain-fed very often, usually. Beta-carotene, which is the precursor to vitamin A and many tetraterpenoids, many things that are antioxidants, contains 10 times more the beta-carotene than in grain-fed meat. Grass-fed meat contains 5 times more vitamin A. Alpha tocopherols are vitamin E's, about 7.5 times more vitamin E. Total fat, about a quarter of the total fat found in grain-fed meat. We talk about the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids. The omega-6 is sometimes called the bad cholesterols, but that's not quite true. We need omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids in our diet, but they need to be in the proper ratio. And guess what? The proper ratio is 1-to-1, just as it occurs in grass-fed meat. Grain-fed meats tend to be heavy on omega-6 fatty acids. CLAs, conjugated linoleic acid, very important for brain and membrane function. Again, 2 to 3 times more abundant in grass-fed than grain-fed meat. So I frequently hear questions about, should I eat red meat? What's that link between red meat and disease? And I really find that much of the literature, it provides very poor guidance on this. Eat half as much as you're already eating, eat no more than what you can fit in the palm of your hand. These are not real answers. I think the best answer, in my opinion, comes from Fred Provenza, who wrote that health is enhanced when livestock forage on phytochemically rich landscapes, is reduced when livestock forage on simple mixture or monoculture pastures, as I showed you in that picture, or consume high grain rations and feedlots, and is greatly reduced for people who eat highly processed diets. To me, that's the key. If you can get your meat in ways that meet the criteria that Fred sets here, that's going to give you a healthy diet. And so take-home message 3, regenerative agriculture produces healthier food than conventional or industrial agriculture. And so to conclude, the earth has been feeding living organisms for 4.5 billion years, and agriculture has often ignored the rules that govern natural systems and as a result has damaged our life support system. However, the evidence supports the thesis that we can grow abundant, nourishing food while improving soil health and sustaining the ecosystems we all depend on. And so take-home message 4, when we nourish the earth, we nourish ourselves. And with that, I'll leave the take-home messages and say thank you and welcome your questions.
Okay. All right, well, very good, Gary. Very illuminating, enlightening. Dean, are you coming back on?
Well, my audio's on. I'm having a little trouble getting my picture back up there, but
Okay. In the meantime, Gary, can can you stop sharing so we can?
Sure.
There we
There
go.
we go.
good. Now I should be okay.
Nice. There we
Yay!
go. Yay, there he is. Okay.
That was great, Gary.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Dean, do you want to handle the questions?
Sure. I see a couple of questions. Bob McFarland, I'm going to unmute you. Bob, you just need to unmute and you can ask your question.
I don't have one at this time, maybe later.
Okay.
But it was
Carol
a very,
Whitaker.
it was a terrific presentation. I
Well,
really,
thank you very much.
it scared me a little bit, but I really loved it.
Well, just eat well.
Carol Whitaker. If you unmute, you can ask your question, Carol.
Maybe I am now.
Yes.
Okay.
Carol.
Hi, Gary. Thank you for a great program. I spent last week traveling all through Schoharie County. That's where my CSA farm is. And I'm just delighted with what's happening so close to where I live out there. One of the things that I'm concerned about, and I don't know the whole story, it was a story last week about the organic milk farmers up in Washington County who converted to what seems like what you want them to do. And now the producer, I don't know what to call the person who's buying up this
Right.
organic milk, is closing them out and leaving them stranded. What is the story behind this?
This is really crazy. What's happening is dairy is really being run in this country by a few very large corporations. They call themselves things like Dairy Farmers of America. So you think that it sounds like a bunch of guys in boots and pitchforks out there trying to run a dairy farm. It's not. It's a corporation run by guys in suits. And they've pretty much decided that in the Northeast, where our farms are small, they need they don't need our milk anymore. They're going to so an average dairy farm might be running 150 to 250 head of cattle in New York and Vermont, let's say. But but my large animal vet has a brother who works for a dairy farm in Wisconsin. That dairy farm has 9,200 head of cattle. And that's who these big corporations want to deal with. It's a huge problem. And I don't know what the right answer is. One of the things that I've talked to friends of mine who are dairy farmers about is, first of all, diversifying, grow some beef cattle and some dairy. Also, something that we're hoping that they can do is do what's called value-added production. So instead of growing dairy and selling it to this co-op, this corporation, produce your milk with a fewer number of cows, and then make it into cheese. And the cheese will sell, and you will not go broke. We just love some of the local cheeses that we get in our area, and that's one way they can survive. Another thing that they're doing as dairymen or dairy farms is dividing you might have 2 or 3 milking barns, and surprisingly, the equipment you need for milk is very similar to the equipment you need to make beer. So you can produce, if you can produce beer and the grains, or get the grains, you can produce, you can become a microbrewery, and the state of New York really supports that kind of solution. But I see it as a catastrophe. I mean, it's one of the things that I tried not to mention today is how strongly corporate America is involved in conventional or industrial agriculture, whereas the small scale farmers are really the ones who are doing what we kind of consider regenerative farming.
I do recall how when money became available last year, that those big conglomerates gobbled up a lot of the money, and it left out the small farmers. And again, it's the lobbying and the power dynamic that does that. Thank you again, Gary.
Oh, sure. Thank you very much. And just to follow up on that a little bit, one of the people I invited to this lecture was Bill Gates. I don't know if he's on the list, but probably not. But the reason we did that is my wife and I had a conversation about how do you get regenerative agriculture, carbon sequestration type agriculture to be profitable and to happen in this country at the scale that it needs to. And we realized that going to our politicians is iffy at best, because there are so many lobbyists in Washington for these big corporations, that what you need, it comes down to money, and it comes down to people like Bill Gates, who just finished a book on climate change, going to an advertising agency and saying, well, here's $1 billion. Let's make everybody in the country aware of how much they need to be buying local, sustainably produced food.
Well, don't think small. Ask Bill for 2 or 3 billion.
You
Come
bet.
on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris, you have a question?
Okay, hi, thanks.
Hi,
Gary,
Chris.
good to see you, not in a years ago. Anyway, I have one quick funny question and then more serious question.
Okay.
Why aren't you fully organic? You mentioned you're organic-y, organic-ish
Right.
early on. Quick answer to that.
Okay. Well, the short answer is that, and this is one of the major reasons. There are a number of things. We don't do anything to our soil, but the real reason, one of the major reasons that we are not organic is, and this is my personal philosophy, one of the reasons that Pam and I got involved in agriculture is so that we could manage animals respectfully. Organic agriculture limits the number of medicines that you can use, and a lot of these are antibiotics that you can use on your animals. And my feeling is when my sheep or chickens are hurting, my philosophies go out the window. I am going to make that animal better. Okay, and so we will use antibiotics that might not be acceptable to the organic community. And that's why we've not become animal welfare approved, because they don't allow you to dock the tails of sheep. And we tried that one year, and it was just horrible for the sheep, not for us. We sold our lambs, did just fine, but those poor animals, that year we had a antibiotic resistant parasite come in, and it was a mess. And it wasn't a mess for us, it was a mess for the animals. So my personal philosophy is I will not do anything, I will not take any certification where I cannot use the best available techniques to ensure the health and happiness of the animals that I'm going to sacrifice.
Okay, no, that's interesting. No, yeah, that's
Long
very
answer.
interesting. Well, I guess what I'm wondering is I had a family relative of mine who was a dairy farmer out near Syracuse, and he often he was not organic, and I think he had similar sentiments that you expressed, and it raises a question about, you know, when you see a organic certified something, it doesn't necessarily, I mean, everybody assumes there's some black and white, good and bad, and I imagine you would get someone in the organic community arguing with you right now about a particular medicine, or
Yep.
and so it's that you open up an interesting area
Yeah,
of discussion. Yeah,
I agree. And Chris, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think right now, organic agriculture was designed to sustain soil. And now, through the appropriate lobbying, hydroponic agriculture, which uses no soil, can be certified organic. So there are many organic farmers who are really questioning where that whole certification is going. And that guy I showed you at the very beginning of the talk, whose pigs are restoring a forest, and I've actually met those pigs, as I said. He will not. He's actually a quite prolific author, and he actually is the editor of a very important newsletter called Stockman Grass Farmer. And one of his editorials is that we will take no certifications. And Dave Brown, who also is a very prolific writer, speaker, and a great farmer, also takes no certifications. So, yeah, I think sometimes it's what's in your heart and mind rather than what's on paper.
You sold me.
Makes the
You sold me. I
difference.
want to buy your. I want to buy some lamb from you.
we have a bunch.
Even though you're not certified. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Now I know that took probably a little more. My quick question is: you described the energetics of cattle, organic versus inorganic or conventional, and you showed it looked like cows fed on grass. You're just not growing a bunch of seed for them, and you're letting them eat for free, essentially. Now, my big question is, why isn't organic products cheaper than the conventional?
Very good question. So it varies with the thing that you're growing. I didn't have time to go into chickens, but chickens require feed, and you have to bring that feed in. And that feed, if you're buying organic chicken feed, that's twice as expensive as the organic. And chickens are omnivores, so they require some of that feed, that corn and soy. For sheep, it's the hay. When I buy hay, I'm buying what's called second cut, which is pretty much the best you can get. I won't go into the energetics of that, but it's more, the second cut is more expensive than the stuff that a lot of conventional farmers use. But if I was to be organic, I would have to only buy hay from people who are certified organic in producing that hay. A few years ago, a friend of mine who produces some of the best organic beef, and we eat it. I mean, we buy it from them. It's phenomenal food, but there was a drought and his farm didn't have hay. He cuts his own hay, but he wasn't cutting enough. And so he was looking all over the place for organic hay, and that can be a real problem. So that's kind of the reason, is that the stuff that you're bringing in as food And even the process that you have to go through to grow, if you're growing your own food, is much more expensive. It's about double the price.
I see a message.
Yeah, it looked like Fred Perdenza had a
Right.
couple of comments. Fred, do you want to add anything? You can unmute if you would like.
Hi, Fred.
Hi, Gary. Great job. I so appreciate it, and presented in such a palatable way for a general audience. I think you did a great job.
Thank you very much, Fred. That means a lot coming from you, and thank you from your Jewish mother.
Okay.
And I see a couple of comments here.
Yeah.
From Scott Burge. Gary, so great to see and listen to you today. Fascinating. Just wow, from a kid that spent 6 summers herding Angus cattle to make his college money. You've convinced me to reevaluate the way I design my intake, at least just a little bit initially. Many thanks for today's program.
Thank you very much, Scott. And I would say that anybody, I once asked I know how to get sheep onto a trailer. You catch the sheep and you put them on the trailer. But if you're trying to get an Angus bull into a trailer, what you have to do is make the bull think it was his idea. And that's hard. So good work, Scott.
Scott, if you want to add anything, go ahead. All you need to do is unmute yourself. Yep.
Gary, thanks so much. And
Thank you, Scott.
it was, talk about a palatable way for people to understand it. You made me understand it. And I was in the humanities as opposed to any of the sciences. So thanks a bunch. And thanks for everything you do.
Oh, thank you, Scott.
One of these days, you'll see my face and my grandchildren, I hope, coming up to watch your dog do his or her work.
We're hoping to do that this year.
Really?
In fact. Yeah, if you want, I'll get your email and put you on the list. We're going to try to have an open house where Chip will get the chance to perform.
Thanks so much for all you do.
And
You bet.
I
Thank
think
you.
Denise McKeon had a comment. Denise, you could unmute if you'd like to add anything to that.
Gary, thank you so much. This is
Thank you, Denise.
fantastic. I learn something new every single time I listen to you. Every single time.
Well, thank you.
And unfortunately, I need to run off back. I have to run to lab now, but thank you, thank you. And I'll see you in a
Couple of weeks.
Yes, yeah, my students are excited, so can't wait.
We are too.
Yeah.
They're going to get scones, by the way.
Oh, seriously?
Oh, seriously, yeah.
Okay. I'm not going to tell them. They will be totally surprised.
Right.
It'll be good. Well, thank you very much.
Thank
See
you,
later.
Denise.
Nice to see you, Denise.
You too, Dean. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
I want to go on that farm field trip. How do I sign up?
Just I'll get a list of the participants and I'll send you an email, or you could just drop me an email, gkleppel@albany.edu, and I'll put you on the list.
Okay, I don't.
Benita?
No, I think I did Benita by mistake, but if she has anything she'd like to ask, go ahead, Benita. No.
No.
I think
No.
that was a mistake on my part, I
Oh,
think.
great, no problem.
Anything else? Anybody else? No? Okay.
I don't see anyone else.
Yeah.
I have one last question, maybe. My
Sure.
favorite dinner is a very, very well marbled ribeye steak. Lots of fat.
Mhm.
Now you mentioned your organic stuff has way less fat. Can you make me a fatty organic?
Actually, believe it or not, people are working on that. We can do it with pork. Berkshire pork will actually marble internally. Right now, the best we can do is USDA choice. We can't do USDA prime. But if you really like well marbled meat, may I suggest lamb?
Okay, very good.
And by the way, I would tell you that I believe Cornell conducted a survey, and I hope I get this right, but in New York State, and 2/3 of the people who did a blind taste test preferred the grass-fed product to the grain-fed product. So there's hope, although I understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, good. I guess the only thing I was going to ask, it was touched on, I think, by Chris with the question of cost. I mean, you made a very compelling case, Gary, about how food produced, regeneratively or organically is healthier and more sustainable than conventional. But there's a big price difference when you go to the supermarket, and I can't help but think that's the major reason why most people still buy conventional, because it's so much less expensive than than the regenerative or the organic. So if somehow, I think there would be more if the prices could come closer together, then I think you'd see a lot more consumption of regenerative or organic foods. Do you see that in the future at any point?
Yeah, well, there are two responses. My response would be that as more regenerative production takes place, the price will come down. Just like I remember when I was a graduate student, I got a Texas Instrument TI-50, and it cost like $200. Today, if you could even find that calculator, it would cost you like 50 cents. But the other answer is a little more, shall I say, in your face, and that comes from Joel Salatin, who is that guy producing pigs and is very in your face. And he says that if you think my food is expensive, try looking at the price of cancer.
Yeah.
So, what you're doing when you eat conventional food that's cheap is, yes, you're getting cheap conventional food, but you're kind of kicking the can down the road and you're setting yourself up for problems later on. The Western disease cluster, heart disease, cancer, stroke, are all resulting from the terrible diet. And they call that the Western diet, and they call the diseases the Western diet complex. So it's really a matter of our of our kicking the can down the road. As the author of The Omnivore's Dilemma, Michael Pollan, put it, we put more priority, we're willing to pay more for our consumer electronics than we are for our good food. We're one of the few developed countries that does that. If you go to France, you don't get that argument. They want the best, most flavorful ingredients in their diet that they can get, and the same with Italy.
Yeah, well, what's that saying? You are what you eat. So I guess that's very apropos to this. Yes.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. Okay, Dean, anything you want to add?
No, I was amazed. I've heard you talk before, Gary, and I learned something each time, and it's very intriguing. I'm happy we had such an audience and some good questions. The only thing I was going to say was to let folks know that we'll take a little respite now. We had some scheduling issues, and our next presentation won't be until October 18th. So thanks for everyone to participate. And Gary, thank you so much again for your wonderful talk.
Thank you, everyone, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak. And don't forget to tell your friends.
Yep, and actually, apropos to Dean's point, the speaker on October 18th is Dr. Benita Zahn. You may know her. She was a former news anchor and health reporter for WNYT TV here in Albany. She's retired from that, is now a health and wellness coach at Capital Cardiology. And she also has a PhD in bioethics, and the topic for her talk on the 18th is happiness, the no-cost way to health. So it sounds like it's a good segue with
Yeah.
Gary's talk about eating your way to good health. And I think Benita, as the former health reporter, is going to continue that theme. So
Excellent.
very good. Okay, everybody. Well,
Thank
we'll
you very
see you in
much.
3 weeks then. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye
Yeah,
now.
bye.